Technology is becoming a greater aspect of the lives of all of our students. Whether it be phones, computers, or the latest iPad, they spend a majority of their day looking at a form of technology. It is our job as educators to ensure that our students are using these in a safe, ethical, and legal way. One form of technology that's often overlooked is a calculator. Students use these all the time, starting in early grade school all the way up to when they finish college, and even into their jobs. It is important that a student knows how to operate a calculator in the most efficient way. When taking the SAT or the ACT, calculators are required. And a lot of the problems can be solved super quickly if you know how to operate this machine. But if you don't, you can waste a lot of time and all of a sudden your score goes down the tubes. But before we get too heated into that, we have to know what the different forms of calculators are. There's the arithmetic calculator that can do the standard addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. These you'll typically see like in a cash register or a restaurant. Like it's just your standard calculator. This would be integrated in terms like elementary school, but you have to be careful because you don't want to make a child reliant on a calculator. But it is important to help them move to the next step. Maybe give another visual aid. The next form of calculator is the basic scientific, which has arithmetic functions as well as complex numbers, functions, logarithms, trigonometry. This is for like your typical middle schooler. When they start getting into higher system problems, they're going to need a little assistance so that they can focus, just like in arithmetic, on what they're trying to learn and not on past information. Another thing that an advanced scientific calculator is just like the basic, except for it has a larger screen. This comes in handy when students can see step by step what they're doing. We all know on a typical calculator you can only see one small strip, and that either gives just your answer or just the number that you're about to add. And that can be confusing for where you are in the problem. The nice thing about the advanced scientific is it allows you to see step by step where you are in your problem, so students don't get lost as easily and they can stay focused on the task at hand. The highest form of calculator is the graphing calculator, and it does exactly what it says. It graphs. These have gotten to be crazy good in the technology world, as in its color. They're basically a computer. You can put multiple graphs on one page, like I said, color oriented, that are labeled, but it also goes as far as doing high calculus problems, can differentiate and do integrals, which is something that you can't do with the other three forms of calculators. A graphing calculator is something that's typically used once you get into high school and definitely in college, and it's very important to have these forms of technology. But how do you integrate them into the classroom? A lot of times the hard part about teaching is that students can't see the tiny screen on a calculator, so they get lost when trying to figure out what buttons to click or where you are now in the equation. But luckily, through technology, we have learned how to make this type of learning easier. There are different forms. There are giant posters that you can put on the wall and use a pointer, or just walk up to and use your finger and point to the buttons as you click them. They also have online calculators that work great on a smartboard. This way that students can be interactive and you can ask them to solve a certain problem and they'll walk up and click the buttons on the smartboard, and it allows you to be able to see their step-by-step process as well. Like on the tiny calculators, as much as they can't see your work, you can't see their work. So if they get behind, it's harder for you to catch them up and figure out what the problem is. But if you're using a smartboard interaction, you can see right at hand what the child's doing, what they need to work on, and can fix the problem before it becomes a big problem. And I love the Nelson Mandela quote of education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. That's darn right. But if you're going to have a calculators or you're going to require any form of technology, especially with the smart board or anything, you have to make sure your students can access it. Because what good does it do if a child is behind in just the equipment that's needed? This is important to make sure that there's always a classroom set of whatever you require, especially calculators, because they can get pretty pricey. The arithmetic ones are pretty cheap. They're about $10. But once you get into high school and you require a graphing calculator, that's $100 approximately is a lot of money for a student to spend on a class that, one, they might only take 1 year of, or because if they don't pursue a higher like math course in college or something, they might not need it past high school. And some families just, they can't afford that. A graphing calculator is not the most important thing on their list. But as a school, we should be prepared to provide what is needed for our students. They should never be forced to order a product, and like I said, the school should be able to provide. But here are some safety tips. A lot of cheating can go on with a calculator. There's different forms of programs that you can type into nowadays, and so students, what they are formed into doing is going into those programs, and instead of typing a program like you should, they'll type in the equations that they need to know on the test, or definitions, or just little helpful hints. There are other different forms of, you can program functions into your calculator where you just click x equals 4, and then it will tell you what your function is when x equals 4, for example, of course. And that's cheating. And it is important to make sure that students are doing the most honest work, especially when taking tests. And when you get to standardized testing or state testing, they definitely can't cheat, because it can really mess up their future. So it is your job as a student to prepare them and to let them know the rules and the barriers that come with calculators. Different ways you can protect them from this is creating a two-part test, where you have one section that's for the calculator and one that's without a calculator. One great way to do this is to color coordinate these tests. So if you have a white piece of paper and a pink piece of paper, it's very clear what student is on which part of the test. So as a teacher, you can monitor if they should have a calculator out or not. Because if it's, say it's 2 white pieces of paper, you're going to constantly have to walk around and check to make sure students are being honest. Another good reason to have a two-part test is it truly tests the student's knowledge. It ensures that a student doesn't become dependent on a calculator, and that they understand the concepts on a basic level, that they can solve equations on their own. But then you can do applied problems that really challenges them to go to deeper lengths of an understanding that it might be easier to have a calculator with to solve, just so it's not time consuming, and that they can get higher level problems. The same thing, you can have a classroom set. If you require them to use a classroom set on the test, well, then you can monitor exactly what's on your calculator, and they won't have any time before the test or after the test or whenever to put functions or cheating answers into their calculators. And one form that I should mention, because it is a possibility, but I don't think this is a good method at all, and I would not advise anyone to do it, is to check every calculator before a test starts. This is time consuming. You wouldn't get through everyone's calculator before the day's over. And so I mention it because it is a possibility, but it's not a good one. So avoid that. But what's next? Especially for a classroom, why would you want to buy a classroom set if all of a sudden technology is booming next year? Like, there might be a better version in a year. The school board can be confident that what they're spending their money on is important to the students. It helps them get to college. It helps them get a job. It's going to further the education and keep their class onto a higher standard. And the nice thing about math, it's been pretty much the exact same for hundreds of years. Maybe not. Yeah, probably. And so the calculator's not changing much. With graphing calculators, there are the Texas Institute that creates calculators. They do have new versions, but that's normally just like new hot features, like you can connect it to different forms of the internet, or you can make them color coordinated. Well, that's not necessary. If you have a calculator that can graph and has all the functions, who cares really if it's in color or not? So you would not have to update what you have constantly. So it'd be a nice investment to make, and you would know that you are not only are hiring the standard that your school has put at, but you're preparing your students for a greater future. It is important to ensure that everything that we do for students is to protect them and to keep them in a safe, ethical environment, even when it comes down to how they use their calculators. This is a resource that students should be able to have complete access to, and it will help them have a greater future. Thank you for taking the time to listen.